a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope you read my newsletter. I went to Texas over the holidays. Um, I'm being told to look a different way. Look at the camera, not at the microphone, Melinda. And had a really good time. Went on the Riverwalk in San Antonio. It was a lot of fun. Did some history and that kind of thing. It's one of our class times tonight, but before we get started talking about codependency, and I want to talk to you about why codependency is important in spirituality, or why any of the subjects that we do are important in spirituality, because when you're blending psychology and spirituality together, that's when you make movement karmically. You know, my big thing is talking about the karmic profile, the lessons that we come into the world to learn, to understand, to work through, to process, to grow from, to impart to others, to all of those things. We have to blend psychology and spirituality together. We have to do the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual body, which in turn then works through the physical body. So tonight's subject is near and dear to my heart because I come from a dysfunctional family, and codependency is usually born out of dysfunction. But before we get started, I have a few announcements to make. First of all, I'm going to be in Los Angeles from the 27th of January to the 30th of January. I'm going to be in Sherman Oaks, and I'm going to be doing individual readings. I'm not going to be doing any workshop work there, but I am going to be doing readings. We do have a few spaces left, and so if you know somebody from LA who wants to have a reading, just let them know to call the office here at 480-755-0222 and talk to Izzy, and we can get them scheduled. And then something in February that's going to be near and dear to my heart, we're going to do some connecting to the other side for suicide survivors. Well, we're going to do it at the Franciscan Renewal Center. We do have 100 seats available. Co-sponsored by Taros. And Taros is also going to be giving a day workshop here at the Empowered Living Center a week after our event on Safe Out, which is teaching about suicide awareness and prevention. I am donating my time and the room at the Franciscan Renewal Center so that all the proceeds from this event will go to suicide awareness and prevention, understanding depression and materials and so on for suicide survivors. And so that's going to be on February 5th at the Franciscan Renewal Center from 1 to 3:30. The tickets are $35, and you must call the office to reserve them. And even though 100 seats feels like a lot, you know, whenever I do one of these kinds of events, I can fill 50 seats up in 3 days. So if you know people who've had a suicide in their background or in their family, you need to have them give us a call and reserve their spot. And the following week, on February 11th, Taros Director Jason Vail Cruz will be teaching a Safe Out class. That's 4 hours, and so that's a really cool thing for us to be doing in February. Then in April, we're going to be in Las Vegas. We're going to be at the Unity Church in Las Vegas doing some workshop work, and then we'll do some private readings. So again, let your Las Vegas people know, and all of these things will be on my website, and they came out on the newsletter. And then I'm so excited that James Prague is coming back to do another weekend with us here at the Mauna Lucia Resort. Once again, we had such a good experience there. That's going to be November 17th and 18th, a Friday night of Connecting to Spirit, a Saturday workshop. So those tickets will go on sale towards late spring, and so we want to make sure that you're aware that that's coming up. And last but not least, we're going to be doing a cruise to the Caribbean. And that is going to be on November 26th through December 3rd, which has all kinds of exciting events and things that we're going to be presenting at that time, where we will be launching our new book, which I will tell you more about as we go along. So those are the events that are coming up. So tonight we're going to talk about codependency, which a lot of people misunderstand because they think a codependent is someone that's dependent on another person. So when I talk to people about codependency, and say to them that you're a codependent, they get insulted. They say, well, I'm independent. I take care of myself. I don't depend on anyone. That's not what a codependent is at all. A codependent is someone that's so busy taking care of others that they forget to know who they are at their core. So codependency is a disease of not knowing one's self. Usually a codependent comes out of a dysfunctional household, because oftentimes when you're in a family of dysfunction, a child of an alcoholic or a child of somebody that has some post-traumatic stress or some mental illness or something along those lines, and that's part of your karmic profile, you can go in a couple of different directions. You can be the hero child, which means that you try to do everything right in order for you to be safe so that the other shoe doesn't drop. And that's usually where codependency is born, that you get your self-esteem by doing everything right and being rigidly in control. Or you can go in the other direction and kind of mimic the perpetrator and have some of those kinds of alcoholic or uh, workaholic or those kinds of issues yourself. So, but codependency is a situation in which, when you're a codependent and you don't realize it, you can't understand why people are resenting your helpfulness. And people are resenting your helpfulness because it feels like such control. Now, we do have the lines open, and so I do want you to call if you have any questions on codependency, if you have any feedback, if you want to talk about it. But we have a whole workshop to go through tonight for the next few minutes. So, and again, this is an important subject, because I think a lot of times spirituality lends itself to people going through something in order to achieve an energy where they reach their higher power and move out of ego and find themselves spiritually and look for the essence of their soul and try to kind of figure out what's happened in their life. So, you know, some of the issues that we talk about that come from our family background lend itself for us to look for answers and to find ourselves in a spiritual way. And oftentimes old souls will choose a lot of karma. They'll have a lot of stuff in their karmic profile in order for them to kind of move through some of this stuff. Okay, so let's talk about this at some length here. So one thing about codependents is they lose touch with what's inside of them. Have you guys ever known somebody that when they started dating somebody, that they became what that person was? Like the person that they're dating loves football, so they'll sit and watch football when they normally wouldn't watch football. Or the person that they're dating loves to go fishing, and so now suddenly they're sticking a worm on a hook. You know, that kind of person. And I'm not talking about, you know, some of the things that we do when we're starting to get to know someone, and there's things that you may do with that person to become part of their world. It's a different kind of energy. It's kind of like the codependent becomes more like the person than themselves, because they don't know who they are. So they kind of are very chameleon-like. Codependents are kind of chameleon-like people who adjust themselves or move energetically into whatever that they can. They meld into that. And it's a form of almost like a barnacle on the bottom of a boat. It's kind of like sticking to somebody. And then they're really nice to them. They're not themselves, and they try to do all kinds of nice things, and so on, to kind of hook that person in to become part of them. That's part of codependency. So they don't know what their own beliefs, what their own thoughts, what their own feelings are. They have trouble making decisions and choices. They're not sure what their wants or their needs are, and they don't know how to trust their intuition. Codependents are so busy worrying about what other people are doing and what other people are thinking, they forget to look at what they are doing and what they are thinking. Have you ever heard of a helicopter parent? You know, this is a parent. I'm hearing this more and more, by the way. I'm hearing this from college professors and from doctors and so on, where a parent will call for a grown-up child and try to insert themselves in the child's situation. talk to a college professor about a grade that didn't go well, or that kind of thing. Things that maybe you should be doing when a kid is in grade school, but definitely not when they're in college. Now, a helicopter parent is often a codependent, and what happens is they stifle the individuation stage of a child in such a manner that the child has no ability to think for themselves, and that creates a real difficult process. And so a lot of times the individuation stage, when you have a codependent parent, is very, very difficult because the child feels like they're engulfed by that parent all the time. This is a parent that may not let a child fail, that may get in there and take over the homework and take over issues with friends and things like that throughout the child's growth years, causing the child to not have an identity of themselves because the codependent parent is vicariously living through the child and creating their identity that way. So there are some issues with codependent parents and some issues with codependent partners, okay? Codependency is probably the most common of addictions. You know, we can either be in self-referral or object referral on this planet. Remember, this is a planet of duality, of trying to balance light and dark, male and female, all of the energies that kind of move together, okay? And we come here for our soul growth to understand how duality works on the planet. So while we're here, we have to be in self-referral. Codependency, though, is in object referral always. It's always something outside the codependent that's making the codependent think or feel or something one way or the other. So it is the most common of addictions. You know, I've had just a little scratchy throat this week, sorry. So codependents believe that something outside of themselves can give them happiness or fulfillment. And so they're always looking for that right job, that right relationship, that right fix in order to make themselves feel good about themselves. They don't go into self-referral. They don't look at their soul. They don't look at their essence. They don't look at their higher power. They're so busy looking at everything else. Have you ever had a friend who was so busy and being up in somebody else's grill like another friend, and all they could do is think and talk and be into that other person, like they don't have the ability to stay inside their own lives. So, for example, if you are on vacation and you have a friend that texts you 3, 4, 5 times while you're on vacation, probably that friend is a codependent. They probably have some kind of a need to make that connection, or they're interrupting or inserting themselves in your life in some form or fashion to make you stop and think about them, because they feel so insecure and they feel so uncomfortable about not having your energy. There are friendships like that they come in and try to kind of usurp some of your energy by texting and or that kind of thing. So that's a form of codependency also. So when we talk about codependence, it's can be a mental situation and a spiritual situation, but it can also be a physical situation, because an example, a codependent parent who, while their daughter and son-in-law are at work, that goes over and cleans up their house and does their laundry and inserts themselves into how the dynamics of the family work with a grown child. That's a codependent thing. That's a physical act of codependency, going and taking over somebody else's household. Or I have heard of a mother-in-law who went to visit a daughter-in-law, and she changed where the daughter-in-law kept her dishes while she was there visiting. That's definitely a little bit codependent, okay? We hear that a lot about mother-in-laws and father-in-laws with that codependency. Or people who are trying to insert themselves in how somebody is raising their children on a regular basis, and trying to take over another person's child. That's a form of codependency, okay? So really, codependency is about neglecting yourself in lieu of taking care of everybody else. And when you neglect yourself, you're definitely creating karma for yourself, because that's not what you're here on the planet for. You're not here on the planet to take care of everybody else. You're only here on the planet to take care of yourself. And I mean that sincerely, because if you're not taking care of your spirit, who is? Everything that you're doing here has to be relevant to what your spiritual growth is. Every relationship you have, every friendship, every connection, every business relationship, every phone conversation, the relationship that you have with your pets even, is all part of a karmic profile. It's all part of trying to find the essence of who you are, and to work through the essence of who you are in a way in which, when you get to the other side, the desire for us at a spiritual level is not to have to come back here. So, when we're codependent and we're creating issues for others because of our codependency, we're probably creating karma where we have to come back and relearn some relationships, okay? So, being a codependent can be very stressful for someone too. Now, codependents are the nicest people on the planet, and I would tell you that I'm probably just about as codependent as anybody can be. It's something that I have really had to work on in my life, because I'm a nice person. I like to do acts of service. That's one of my languages of love, is to do something for someone. But I was with my partner last night, and he got annoyed with me, which I found very interesting, because I was doing acts of service, but I wasn't connecting into him. I was just doing the codependency thing. I was putting him in a position of, what do I need to get done? I need to take the dog out. I need to take the garbage out. I need to feed him. I need to, whatever I need to do. And just placed him in that lineup in a codependent way. And it immediately triggered him out. And I hadn't been codependent in this relationship. So as soon as I felt his annoyance, it actually kind of tickled me, to tell you the truth. But yeah, it was about me realizing and recognizing yet once again that I have to work through this issue, because like an alcoholic, once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. The alcoholics that say, well, now I can drink 1 or 2 drinks and not go too far, were never alcoholics to begin with. They probably had a drinking problem at one time, but maybe they have a handle on it. A true alcoholic can never take a drink. A true codependent has to watch what they're doing with codependency. It never goes away. It's something that we have to continuously watch, because it gets a pattern of behavior going where you're so busy fixing everything that you forget to come in and connect in to yourself, okay? So the stress part of codependency is when you're so preoccupied with someone else's behavior that it affects you, and you can't let go of it, and it bothers you, and you keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. I know someone who has had some challenges in relationships, and when there was a break in a relationship that should have been broken, because you really should get rid of toxic people in your life. If you don't get rid of toxic people in your life, you truly are a codependent, because codependents love toxic people because it gives them food for them to keep ruminating over. I mean, they just love to be in toxic situations, because then they can triangulate, which means that they can talk about the toxic person to somebody else, and it can become a huge big energy, and it's a lot of drama and a lot of chaos, and codependents love that kind of stuff. So this person, after she broke the relationship with some people she was working with, continued to talk about them and talk about them and talk about them and talk about them and talk about them. So much so that it became such a preoccupation, and she was sure she was being psychically attacked, and she was sure that she was being talked about behind her back, and she was sure of this and this and this, and she would engage whomever she could engage to talk about this thing, because she was getting her self-esteem from people telling her she was okay, that freeing herself from that situation was okay, it was a good thing, and she was actually pulling on everybody's energy that way. I'm sorry, guys. I've had such a scratchy throat for the last couple of days. So that's a form of codependency. And the other thing is that codependents have what we would call an arrested identity development, which really means that they overly react to things outside of themselves and underreact to things within themselves. And again, that's because the codependent doesn't always know how they're feeling. And if you're a really good codependent like I was, one of the things my mother taught me was that you only cry in the shower. And you don't cry in front of other people, and you don't let them know how you're really feeling, because it's really all about them, and it's all about how they're feeling, and it's all about what they're doing, and you're not supposed to, share your feelings or so on. So I was taught that, don't share that kind of stuff because it makes you weak and vulnerable. And it took me a long time to understand, and I'm still working on it, that there's power in vulnerability. That when people are vulnerable with each other, it creates a connection. It allows somebody else to help you. And a codependent usually doesn't like to be helped. They're kind of strength snobs. They think they're stronger than everybody else and that they can carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they're martyrs about it. And so they're kind of snobby about that and don't like to be vulnerable. And so that's a form of codependency also. So codependents also don't have very good self-esteem. And they get their self-esteem by getting recognized by other people. I've had more clients that have come to me and said, everybody thought my mother or everybody thought my father was a great guy or a great woman because they did charity work, and if somebody died, they were the first one to the house with a casserole or whatever. But inside the home with us, there was nothing. And that's because, again, that parent had such little self-esteem and felt so unable to connect to self that if they did something outside themselves in that object referral, they would feel good about themselves. But at home, when no one else was looking, they were an empty vessel. And I guess that's the point about codependency. Codependency is a place of beingness where you feel like an empty vessel. And inside that empty vessel, you're trying to fill it up with things outside of you. And that never works. And so you try and you try and you try to fill that emptiness up until you come to a place where you hit a wall and realize that the only way you can fill that empty self up is by finding the self. So that's some issues about codependency also. There's characteristics of codependence that I want to go over with you, but certainly I want to hear from you tonight. So if you would like to give us a call, 602-875-0444, with some comments or something about codependency, or if you think you're a codependent, or if you think there's a codependent in your life and you want to ask a question about it, please give us a call, because I want this to be interactive. Again, 602-875-0444. And as my codependent coach over here tells me to say the number again. So let's talk about characteristics of codependency. And I want to talk about characteristics because, remember, there are aspects that are character driven and there are aspects that are behaviorally driven in our lives. And so I think that some of this can be behaviorally driven, and I think some of this can be characteristically driven.
Okay, ready, Tracy?
But I think we have a phone call coming in, so let me just wait a minute and see what the phone call is.
Okay, Jane. Hold on just a moment. Okay.
And I don't think I have my phone pushed over here either, by the way. I don't have my phone pushed over here. Okay. All right, so you're transferring? And who's on the line?
Jane.
Okay, so what am I doing here? I'm pushing this one. I'm pushing this one?
Yeah, push.
Did I forget? Hi, Jane, are you here?
Hi, good evening, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I remembered how to do this, thank gosh darn it. I miss a week and then I'm all discombobulated. How are you, Jane? How was your holiday?
phenomenal. How about you?
Oh, I had a great holiday. Thank you very much. I've had a little bit of time, a little hard time adjusting and getting back to work this week, and I've had some readings with some people who've had some heavy losses, and sometimes that is, can be hard to get back into the swing of,
Wow, yes.
So,
No kidding. Well, I didn't have any of that situation going, fortunately.
well, good. I'm glad about that. Tell me, Jane, what your question is or comment on codependency tonight.
Okay, so possibly in the past, I could, from your description, I could probably see a little bit of codependency. Obviously, I thought I was just helping, as you well pointed out.
Yeah.
Everything was done, obviously, with loving intentions. And I found that I did have to start taking, step away and just kind of let lessons happen.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, like with people, I didn't really notice a hard time with necessarily just like family, like, children.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed to be like, oh, wait, am I just helping? Am I enabling? Am I codependent?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a big difference between a hand up and a handout, right? And so,
but when you're the parent, a single parent, because then you throw in a little bit of guilt in there, and the shoulda, woulda, couldas, and lines tend to be a little blurred. At least for me, they were just kind of blurry.
Well, I think especially in my generation, where a lot of us are serial monogamers, and there's a lot of divorces and remarriages and that kind of thing. There's a lot of guilt involved with the kids, and I think guilt does kind of play into trying to overcompensate with your child in some form or fashion to, when they need help. But when you're enabling somebody, you're hurting them. When you're giving them a handout, you're hurting them. When you're empowering somebody and giving them a hand up, that's a different story. And you do that with people who are willing to help themselves. And so, for example, with drug addicted children, all too often I have parents that don't have any clue about how to practice tough love because they're afraid their child's going to die. And if they reject their child or turn their child away, that the child is going to overdose or die or go away or get arrested or get beat up or get killed or whatever that's going to be. And they don't realize that when they are enabling that child by giving them shelter when they need it or giving them money when they need it, they're actually really helping them to die. It's tough love that helps a child get sober. It's tough love that creates that energy of respect that, hey, I think you can do this on your own. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't help with rehab or you don't help in certain situations, but I have a client whose son has come back to me after having been a heroin addict, who called me in the middle of the night and said he's standing out on my front porch and he's begging me to let him in. What should I do? And I said, call the police, which she did. And he ended up going to rehab, and now he's happy and married and has kids and the whole 9 yards. But did she risk losing him that way? Well, sure. So codependency sometimes is real dangerous with that guilt that you're talking about. And I'm not saying your kids were addicts or anything, but I'm just kind of talking about, I think it was a good subject that you brought up about how are we codependents with children, especially when we've been single parents, and the fact that we may overcompensate from guilt. And it happens in the worst of circumstances when a kid has an addiction, where there's so much codependency and so much trying to fix it that the parent doesn't allow the kid to fix it themselves. Because the parent doesn't allow the kid to fix it themselves, it just gets worse and worse, and it becomes a cycle where eventually they do lose their child or could lose their child. So I think that was good that you brought that up. Helping and enabling are two different things.
Right, but it's kind of so, you see that they're making progress and they are, doing it on their own. You practice the tough love and then you kind of want to, say, hey, you're doing a great job. So if they, ask for a little something, you feel like, well, kind of, I guess rewarding them maybe is a good word, but, you see that they are actually trying and working hard and doing it. You're not giving them a hand out. And so then you feel like, yeah, okay, at this point, now I'm giving you, a hand up.
Right.
But then I don't know, does that actually, again, it's like a fine line.
There's a fine line between codependency and helpfulness, and that's why many codependents don't recognize that they're codependent because they think they're just being helpful. But I don't know, if you're in your between 50 and 60 somewhere, are you?
Yes.
Okay, so our
Well, actually, I crossed over. Yeah. I'm between 60 and 70 now.
You haven't crossed over, but okay, you're between 50 and 70. Well, but in our generation, our parents said, "You're 18, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out." But and we made
My
it.
generation, I remember I couldn't wait. I couldn't A, wait to drive, and B, I couldn't wait to move out. I mean, that wasn't like a punishment for my mom or anything. I was just like, hey, did a great job. I want to be on my own.
But that was in
my son's generation. He didn't want to drive.
Right.
He had no interest in driving. He had no interest in moving out. I was like, oh, whoa, okay.
Well, again, when we're talking about karmic profiles and we're understanding the idea of karmic profiles, we have to look at generational patterns too. So, our parents' generations, the men went off to war young, World War II, Korea, all of that. They went off to war young. And so in our collective consciousness factor, we were taught that you must be independent and start taking care of yourselves young. Whereas, again, in our generation, it seems that we ended up being more likely to divorce or have situations that were like that, and overcompensated to our children because we felt guilty, and maybe became more of a codependent generation because of that. It's just, something that's in the collective consciousness factor too. Energy works not just from within you, but it comes from not an object referral, but it comes from patterns of energy that are developed from one generation to the next also. So if I hear somebody that's comes to see me in their 70s or 80s and says that their parents were divorced in the 1920s or 30s, that was rare. Okay, when I got divorced, my children were sent to the Banana Splits in school, which was a group that took all the children of divorce out of class so that they could have some kind of group therapy. Blah. I didn't even know that wasn't a good thing. I just let it happen. Whereas in the generations now, it's like, oh, well, that was my stepfather then, and now I have a stepbrother, and I have a step this, and I have a step that, and they're all used to all that commingling of family energy. It's very different how it happens in the collective consciousness factor. So, but Jane, it doesn't feel like you're codependent, sweetheart, other than you felt obligated to pick up the phone and call me tonight, and I appreciate that. So if you were codependent with me tonight, I'm going to thank you for that, and thank you for calling, and don't forget next week we're going to do readings, okay?
Wonderful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, honey. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So again, struggling with my voice, and I'm very sorry. So, a characteristic of a codependent is that the good feelings about who they are, stem from whether they're liked or not. Codependents hate it when they don't have people that like them. As I'm choking in front of you. So a codependent, if somebody dislikes them, feels a burden from that. They feel burdened by not being liked. So they try to make sure everybody likes them. They'll do things that other people have trouble measuring up to. Meaning they're the first ones to send a thank you note or something like that. Not that that's a bad thing. I think that's a great thing. But what I'm saying is it's part of that codependent personality profile. I'm going to take a cough drop. Sorry, guys. So Codependents also feel like somebody else's struggle affects their serenity. In other words, they can't find peace within themselves if they've got other people that are struggling around them. So their mental attention is always focused on solving other people's problems. Now, I've obviously made a living out of this. I mean, that's how codependent I am. But I promise you that I do the best I can not to take my troubles from what I've learned from the day home with me if I can help it. Although I do allow clients to text me and call me if they need me, and I will be there. I don't know if that's a bad thing for codependency or not. Anyways, codependents are very manipulative people. Try to say manipulative with a cough drop in your mouth. They manipulate people to do things their way because they feel that their way is the right way. So a codependent may try to get you to, I'm trying to think of a good example. I think a codependent will help you to the degree where they're pushing you to do things the way they would do it. And you're so happy for the help, but also feel so pressured by it that you'll go along with the codependent and think to yourself, well, I'll fix it later, or I'll do it my own way later. I know my sister Chris is a wonderful person, but a codependent, and she loves to decorate. I love to decorate. I'm good at it. Maybe not as good as she is. I don't know. My mother was an interior designer. We both have some talent. You know, all four of us girls have some talent. But I remember moving here to Arizona, and she was helping me pull together a house. And by helping me, she started putting things where she wanted them rather than where I wanted them. And it caused me great anxiety because I didn't feel, because she was helping me, like I could say, no, I don't want that there. I want this over here. So that would be a form of codependency where somebody's trying to manipulate you to do things their way. Because that way, my sister Chris could get her self-esteem from somebody coming in and saying to me, oh, you've got a beautiful house. If she was with them, she would say, well, I did that. I helped her decorate that, or I did that. I chose that, that kind of thing. And she did that with all the best intentions. She truly did. It was really about her being wonderful in her own mind. But the truth was she was pressuring somebody in order to resolve her own poor self-esteem issues so that she could pump herself up. That's a form of codependency. Again, codependents would rather share hobbies and interests with somebody than do their own hobbies and interests. Although a codependent will have to achieve inside of a hobby. They don't feel like they can fail at anything because, again, codependency is about working through self-esteem issues. Codependents feel like somebody else's behavior is a direct reflection on them. So I think it happens between couples a lot, where if one of the people of the couple is being an ass, the codependent feels like that person is reflecting on them rather than just saying, oh, you know, Susan's husband is an ass. Susan feels like she's responsible for her husband's behavior, and if other people view his behavior poorly, it's a reflection on Susan. So that's a form of codependency. You're looking at me, Amadeus, with your eyes. What are your thoughts about that?
It's like a nice vacation that two people just got off of. And, you know, the days were a little bit planned, but not so totally choreographed. So when wandering through the day, we were able to find adventures together. It's, you know, let's kind of wander over here and see what's going to unfold. And we were both ready to wander down that path together. It wasn't a choreographed thing that we're going to stop here and do this, and then we're going to have a coffee here, and we're going to have a donut there. And no, it was, let's just kind of wander out there and see what unfolds. And it seems like if you choreograph something all the way through, then that's a manipulative, controlling type of thing.
That's
Because you're
codependency.
making sure that the person is going to have fun on your terms.
Oh, that's a good point. I think that's a very good point. Somebody trying to make somebody have fun on your terms. I think codependents do that. You know, what's interesting is not everybody's view of fun is the same.
And discoveries that unfolded when, just allowing the opportunities to occur. Visits to a church, totally off the beaten path, unknown. Visits to a courthouse, and that was an interesting adventure in and of itself. But it was just allowing things to happen as they would, and the both of us not putting any attachment on the outcome of it, of what was occurring. The attachment, or what we were defining, is time together and allowing things to unfold together.
Attachment is an important word because codependents attach energy to the outcome of how people perceive them every step of the way. From a male perspective, have you been codependent in your life? And if so, how? Or have you had codependency in your life, and how has that affected you? Because I'm wondering if more women are codependent than men because of the collective consciousness factor, and the fact that women are trained from the get-go that they have to be caretakers. Whether codependency is a disease that's more female energy, or whether there's something from a male perspective that you could say about codependency.
It's interesting because you talk about the male gestalt, the guys down at the watering hole and having to identify with one another, and I'm doing this, I'm accomplishing this, I'm accomplishing that, and it becomes kind of an egotistical battle between males at the watering hole or whenever they're together. And the codependency is that I need you to make me feel better about the things that I'm doing so that I can be a guy just like you. It's the guy club. So naturally women have a caretaker perception, but guys have the machismo that we need to maintain. That's a false bravado.
So it's about validating each other, is that what you're saying?
Precisely.
Okay.
And that turns into a spin cycle when you validate, and it causes a removal and a split, and that is when you get into having a total male ego, and you go home and there's the wife with her feminine point of view, but you're so wrapped up in the male, you can't do it. You can't get into the feminine thing. So instead, you're going to be doing things like, I'm providing for you, you need to follow me. I'm the one in charge here, and I'm the one who's doing things perfectly and correctly, and if you don't follow me, then I'm the martyr. You're the one who's hurting me. I'm the one who's giving all for the family, so you have to follow me.
So are you saying then that because of the dynamics between men and women, and the fact at a psychological level men are raised by women, so therefore at a deep-seated level men may need and resent women at the same time, that men are creating that codependency in women?
Yeah, they're creating that because they can't reach out and touch their own feminine side.
So you do think codependency is more of a female issue?
That's a knife that cuts both ways.
Because don't you think that men who are codependent do so in a different way? Maybe not. I mean, there are manipulative men, right?
Yeah.
Men are more likely to be controlling outright, and women are more likely to be controlling manipulatively, though. It's just the energy difference between a male and a female energy. But don't you think that there are some men who create codependency by making sure that they're taking care of everything, such as the bills and all that stuff, and a woman doesn't know what's going on? That kind of that's the man being codependent, making the woman unable to do anything for herself to build his self-esteem.
Well, the thing about a guy that's twice as old as a girl that needs a husband, she has children, she's single, she needs the husband, she needs the house, she needs the income, she needs the support, and he tells her, you're the trophy wife, you stay home, you take care of the kids, I'm taking care of everything. You don't need to question anything I do.
So he's the codependent, though. You understand that he's the codependent. She's not. See, that's my biggest concern about teaching codependency is it gets so confused with the idea of dependency. So yes, she may be dependent on him, but he's the codependent. He's created it so that her world revolves around him, and so that his whole attention may be focused on pleasing her, or protecting her, but it's actually a form of manipulation. That's where the codependency comes through.
Well, he's a rescuer, and also he's putting himself in a position as a martyr.
Mm-hmm. Most codependents don't know how they feel. They are only aware of how the other person feels, though. And that may be some power play on his point. I don't know. Because codependents, again, are the nicest people on the planet. He doesn't sound like he's a very nice man. Sounds like he's taking advantage of the situation. So there may be some level of codependency in it, but I think he knows how he feels. And codependents don't know how they feel. They only know how somebody else feels. And so they really work hard at making the other person feel like they're the codependent, indispensable to them. And that's how they get their self-esteem built. So, codependent.
Well, if you create that facade, though, that's the creation of it's kind of getting deep on that. You create a facade of codependency. This is who I'm presenting to you, and this is how I own you.
There's definite manipulation in there. But most codependents don't know what they want. They only know what somebody else wants. So in a situation like that, he knows what he wants. He wants the outside world to look in and see something that probably isn't true. I don't know what she wants, but I think most codependents don't really know what they want out of life. They really don't know themselves at all. Everything's about whatever somebody else wants of them. That's the truth of the essence. Because remember, codependency is a disease of not knowing oneself. And so I think he may be manipulative, but I'm not sure either one of them are codependent. I think they're probably plugging into each other in some other kind of way. There may be some kind of characteristics of codependency within that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that really codependency is there's a naivety to it, as well as an innocence to it. Does that make it easier to address if there's an innocence to it?
I think there is maybe a misunderstanding about it. So if that translates into some kind of naivete or unawareness of what somebody's doing, yes. I'm not sure it's innocent, though, because I think sometimes codependents are quite calculating when they don't feel liked, and they maneuver people around in order to get that person to come on their side, or to create some kind of a bond or connection that will allow the codependent person to feel better in their self-esteem. Okay, so in true cases of addiction, we look at an alcoholic and his codependent wife or husband, and the codependent person doesn't really want the alcoholic to get better, even though they say they do, because by that person's alcoholism, it gives the codependent fodder to be able to control the situation through the other person's alcoholism, and it's some kind of an intricate dance between two people. Okay, so a codependent will put their values aside to connect with someone. So I have clients that will come and see me. I had one particularly, I'll give you an example, who, when he came alone, he would be upset about his wife drinking beer, a couple beers a night or whatever, and getting enough beer in her that she would be sloppy. And it was upsetting him. But yet when I talked to her alone, she would tell me that he would buy beer and put it in the refrigerator. Okay, so he really didn't want her to quit drinking, because it would take away the identity of how their relationship and the dynamics of their relationship worked. So while she was sloppy, he could tuck her to bed and whatever he needed to do, feel sorry for himself, be a martyr, and then he could get on the computer and do his own addiction. So it's that kind of stuff that happens between people that have addiction and codependency. So, he was a martyr and she was drinking, and he wanted her, when he was talking to me, to get sober or on track or to quit drinking or whatever. But by the same token, he would buy beer and put it in the refrigerator. When I confronted him about it and said, "What are you doing?" He said, well, if he didn't get the beer for her, she'd be upset, and he didn't want her to be upset. In other words, he really didn't want to change the dynamics. It was all manipulation on his part. Now, is there naivete in that? I don't know. It's a cycle of energy that happens between people. Maybe as a codependent, he didn't recognize that he was the one that was controlling the situation, not her at all. In truth, he stopped seeing me and she continued. She got better. She got empowered. In fact, she stopped drinking beer. And in months along the line, when she started doing better and getting better, he started to say that I was not the greatest counselor in the world, and he thought that maybe she should, quit coming to see me and things like that, because he was losing control. And remember, codependents are all about control. And he was losing control because she was becoming empowered. So he was the codependent, even though it looked like she was the one with the disease. So, there's, some example of codependency that's a little different dynamic than maybe an older man with a younger woman trying to take advantage of whatever that energy was. He really wasn't aware of how he was feeling. He was only aware of her feelings. In other words, he was saying her feelings counted more than his. So because her feelings counted, he was going to go get the beer for her, even though it was really his feelings that he was working with but not having an awareness of. Does that make sense?
It reminds me of the old child who tell the doctor, "Doctor, every time I do this, it hurts." Well, then don't do that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a hard prescription. Well, actually, we just had somebody text in a question.
Okie dokie.
And the question is, what does one do when they recognize codependency in themselves or someone else?
Well, just what the joke just said. Stop doing that. Perfect timing, whoever texted. First of all, in yourself, it's really hard to recognize when you're codependent, whether you're doing something just because you're being nice, or you're doing something because you want something out of somebody else and you're manipulating, or you're trying to control. So you have to stop and look at energy and motivation behind it. But a true codependent has to learn who they are, what they want, what their feelings are, learn to say no, understand how to set boundaries. And as we progress tonight, there's different types of codependence too. And we'll talk about the different characteristics of the different types of codependence, because that contributes to some of how to recognize and make some movement through it. So really, if you recognize yourself as a codependent, you have to start really understanding who you are. So my first choice would be go to therapy. But there are codependence groups. There's CODA groups in town. I think there's one at the Methodist Church on Scottsdale Road, and it's down by Shea, but not quite. Mountain View, I think it is. I think it's on a Tuesday night, but you can look that up, because CODA groups will really help you recognize whether you're being codependent or whether you're just being, yourself. If you look at yourself and see you're a codependent, you have to stop caring about what everybody thinks about you. You have to go by, you've seen this on Facebook all the time, like, well, what other people think of you is none of your business. You've seen that thing rolling around. Well, that's the truth. Codependents always make it their business what other people think of them. People who have good self-esteem don't really give a damn about what other people think of them. They just are themselves all the time, and who the hell cares, okay? So, usually a codependent's very worried about presentation and all of that kind of stuff. And don't say get your shit together on a camera and things like that. But, when you know yourself and you're okay with yourself, you're able to be yourself. And so I think part of it is to learn to know what you like where your spiritual belief systems are and don't switch them. Understand boundaries. Learn how to say no. Don't go to a movie with somebody if you don't like scary movies and they want to go see a scary movie. Say no, that kind of thing. Don't go for Thai food if you don't like Thai food just because somebody else does. That kind of thing, stops the codependency. And what the question was, if you recognize it in somebody else, oh man. Boundaries, 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 and boundaries. Boundaries are hard to set with people who are codependent, and it takes maybe multiple times to set a boundary. There's a really great book by Charles Whitfield, Whitfield, called Boundaries and Relationships. That is a great book on how to understand, set parameters and boundaries around people. So if a codependent person wants to do something that you don't want them to do, and you say no and they insist, you've got to say no and no and no. You have to be as firm with your boundary as they are with trying to control you through whatever they're trying to do. So that's the answer to that, okay?
Yeah, it sounds like it's an extreme representation on that scale of codependency, that a bully would be right at the peak of what codependency is.
Well, I think codependents are much more subtle than bullies because, again, codependents are working out of a true feeling of wanting to be nice and caring. A bully is working out of a true feeling of wanting to be blatantly controlling and aggressive and hurtful and spiteful. And codependents aren't hurtful or spiteful at all. They don't do it in deliberate intent. It's really about them not knowing themselves and having such poor self-esteem that they set up the parameters to feed their self-esteem. And this man who I was talking about that bought the beer for his wife, he loves his wife. He doesn't want his wife to be empowered because then he loses the connection that they have, and maybe she's going to be so empowered that she won't want to be with him anymore. But it wasn't out of malicious intention, or he wasn't trying to bully her by doing that. He was just setting up an energy where he felt safe, and the control dance is much more subtle with codependency than it is with bullying. And bullying is really about, codependents have more passive aggressive energy than they have aggressive energy. Bullies are more just blatantly aggressive. Bullies have a lot of arrogance, and codependents aren't arrogant at all. They're manipulative, but not in an arrogant way. One of the things about codependence is that the value of their life depends on how valuable they are to other people. I think that's the best way to explain a codependent energy. Okay. You said something about a rescuer.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of codependents are rescuers. They're people who try to help others while neglecting themselves. They may lose their identity in helping others. Helping professionals. I'm going to put my glasses on, guys. Helping professionals often manifest codependency in this way. So again, I'm telling you readily that I've been a codependent in my life. It is something I continue to work on, but certainly my job, my career, feeds that codependent issue. So it's one of the truest guises of a codependent is to become a counselor or whatever. It was their survival technique that they learned growing up in a dysfunctional family, how to advise, how to counsel, how to help. I remember when I was in, this is how you learn codependency. When I was in 3rd grade, my teacher, Mrs. Parsons, was a very harsh and hard woman, and she scared the life out of me. And I wanted to switch out of 3rd grade, and I went to my mother, and she said, absolutely not. You got to learn how to deal with difficult people. Okay, I see my mother's point in that. But what I did was I became a brown noser. I looked for anything I could to compliment Mrs. Parsons every single day of the 3rd grade. Every single day of the third grade, Mrs. Parsons was told that her shoes were nice or something. And I just learned to be very codependent. I was the one that raised my hand to help. I was the class, I was her class pet. I hated her. I hated her every day of the third grade. I hated her every moment when I complimented her. I hated every minute of staying after and helping her with things. I hated that woman. At the end of the year, she told my mother that I was a pleasure to have in class, that I was the best student she ever had. I was the nicest child she ever taught. And my mother came home very, very happily and said, "See, I told you, you would learn to get along with Mrs. Parsons." That lesson stuck with me and became a codependent factor in my life. Codependents learn to be chameleon-like. They learn to get along with difficult people. That's great because it's a good survival technique, except when we begin to understand vibrational frequency in the universe and how the law of attraction works and the mirror of what God does for us. So, because I became such an expert in getting along with difficult people, I attracted difficult people to me, and I became the ultimate rescuer. And it's one of the reasons that I'm multiply married. Like I said, I attracted a difficult person to me, and I rescued him. And then when I was done with that, I was done with that. And so I just moved on to the next rescue to keep my self-esteem going, and also to martyr myself, and to be a people pleaser and all that stuff, be an overachiever. These are all personality traits of a codependent. And I can tell you right now that I learned that in third grade. Now, did my mother mean for that? My mother was being a good parent. I understand what my mother was doing. My spirit chose that particular coping mechanism, and I pulled it into my adult life. Now, people pleasers as codependents have unhealthy boundaries and limits. They're the ones that would rather acquiesce and comply with others than express their own healthy needs and wants. Again, they're the ones that will go to see a movie that they would never see with themselves. Like, for example, I would never go see a movie that has that scary spiritual stuff. I hate that stuff. I don't want to see it. I'm not going to go see things about goose and ghoulies and all that stuff. I don't like that. So, but I did, when I was young, with my father of my children, go see The Exorcist because he wanted to see it. It traumatized me. It definitely traumatized me. And it was something that I knew better than to go see. So again, I was being a people pleaser and doing something that, I shouldn't have been doing. Part of the recovery of someone who is codependent is to learn how to say no. No, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. Okay. People pleasing is a subtle form of manipulation and control. So I remember having fights with him and crying to him and saying, "Well, you made me see that movie and now I can't sleep at night and now you have to." So I guilted him, and I was manipulating him and trying to control him because I did something to please him, and it backfired on him. That's codependency. Okay? Third, an overachiever can be a codependency because they feel empty. They have that loss of their true self. Codependents can often be overachievers, or it can go from one job to the next, to the next, to the next, trying to find their niche in the world because they've never quite found that part of themselves that they feel satisfied and good about. And that's part of being an overachiever. Now, not all overachievers are codependents. I'm not sure Donald Trump is a codependent, but many codependents are overachievers because, again, it's about having poor self-esteem and trying to raise their self-esteem and fill their emptiness. So as children, they may have been the child heroes. Blah, 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 blah. There are people who are inadequate or failure kind of people. that end up doing codependent issues because they feel imperfect, because they feel incomplete, inadequate, not good enough, because they feel bad or rotten or flawed at their core. They actually have a underlying manifestation of codependence because they use that kind of energy to manipulate people. Those are the Eeyores of life. You know, the ones that say to you, "Oh, I just can't catch a break. If I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all." That can be a form of manipulation for somebody to, you know, move and energetically connect, and so that they can be controlling and so on. Okay, perfectionists. There's no perfect person on this planet, but there are people that are preoccupied. They have an unhealthy preoccupation with perfection to their own detriment. This is a form of codependency that I too have done. I guess I'm just really a classic codependent here. So I had this idea this week that all my Christmas decorations need to come down. And I was going to get them down come hell or high water, because I'm a perfect person, right? And if my Christmas trees were up past the time limit for Christmas trees to be up, then I don't know what would happen, but in my own head, something would happen. And I need to be perfect. I guess it would be that not everybody would admire me and tell me how wonderful I am, or what a great woman I am. And so therefore, I drive myself and others around me to do that kind of perfectionism, because again, it's something that happens from poor self-esteem, something that happens in childhood. So many codependents are perfectionistic, and in their codependency, they expect people around them to be perfectionistic too, so that that perfect world isn't jarred by anything. So they'll manipulate people or drive people for that level of perfectionism. Sometimes codependents have victimization in their energy field. That's a complementary disorder for a codependent. People with chronic illnesses that make their partners feel obligated to them is a form of codependency. Making their partner feel like they're at fault for somebody's illness is part of codependency. It's a form of manipulation and control. It's a form of when that partner feeds them back the compensation energy. It's a form of filling themselves up or filling their self-esteem up. So that can be a form of codependency. Martyrs are definitely codependents. You know what they name after martyrs, don't you, Amadeus?
Yeah, tombstones.
Churches and fire hydrants. Think about it if you don't understand fire hydrant. So martyrs refuse to really face how they feel. They put themselves up on a pedestal in ways in which they're long suffering, so that people can tell them how wonderful they are. Again, it's part of that codependent syndrome. It's really all about being so empty inside that you're trying to fill yourself up by taking some kind of a role that is existent only because you're projecting it out and not working from within. You know, that understanding. And lastly, did you know that sometimes people who are addicted are also codependent? So you're looking at me like that. So if you're an alcoholic, can you be a codependent too?
I would imagine you can, because you're using the alcohol to put yourself in a position of being addicted.
Well, you're putting yourself in that position. You're putting yourself in a position where you're controlling and manipulating other people. Okay.
I'm the victim. I need help. You've got to help.
Okay.
I'll have a drink.
So there's usually codependency with every other disorder, including alcohol, drugs, eating. You know, eating addictions usually have codependency in it. Okay. There are codependents that are so compulsive that they manifest codependence in ways in which, like if they're compulsively neat, they manifest that perfection in their world in a way in which if something goes amiss, it hurts their self-esteem. In other words, it's all about self-esteem with codependence. So you were talking about bullies earlier, and that's also about bad self-esteem. But a codependent, if they're bullying, will do it in a subtle, tactic way. So I think we talked about this once before. I don't know if we talked about this with the angels, but there's a book called The Emotionally Abusive Person, and I was reading it, and I came along a chapter about humor and how people can use humor in a way in which it's abusive. And when I read that chapter, I was like, oh, that's me. I do that to people. I make fun or laugh or, use humor in a passive-aggressive way. That's part of my codependency. That would be part of a codependent bullying factor, that passive-aggressive rather than the aggressive piece. So if you're using humor and kind of making fun at someone in a manipulative way, then that's a form of codependency.
So it sounds like Don Rickles was the poster child for sarcasm and codependency.
Him and Phyllis Diller, right?
Okay,
And that we've got angels that have no idea who the hell we're talking about because they're too young. Think of somebody young, Amadeus. You're giving away our age. Okay, so lost children. I think this is interesting. I want to talk about, and I'm jumping around on this a little bit, and I know we have to go back on a couple, but lost children are often the third born or later child in a dysfunctional family. P.S. I'm the third child in my family. And so is Amadeus. They are so overwhelmed by trying to get appropriate attention and to get their needs met in competition with their older siblings, often the hero or the overachiever, and the second born, who is often the delinquent, bully, or the bad one, that they give up and withdraw. In an attempt to help handle their frequent psychosomatic illnesses, they may become victims, martyrs, or stoic. So I would say I probably became stoic. My second sister wasn't a bully, but she was accident prone all the time. My older sister was definitely difficult and probably was the perpetrator in our family. But I would definitely say I was the lost child. Like I was the one that didn't feel like I was noticed for sure. And so that therein lies the blossoming of codependent energy. As a third child, do you think that you felt like the lost child in your family?
Oh, absolutely. When I left home, I quit speaking to my father for over 20 years. I couldn't go back home until I had actually done something that would have made him happy. In order to make him happy before I went home or contacted him after 20 years, I became the owner of a very successful legal enterprise, became mayor of my community, married, children, the whole thing. And then I was able to go home and I could tell my dad, look, I'm an elected mayor of my city. I own this business and I have all these people work for me. I have these beautiful children. I have this big, beautiful home on a lake. What do you think about me? And he said, wow, you have really done well, son. Where the hell have you been for 20 years?
So now I think you've just described how males turn into codependents. Although there's detachment energy around that, becoming an overachiever in order to have that self-esteem lifted by your father. So that may be a piece of some codependent energy there. That may be also about being the lost third child. Comedians, by the way, are the family mascot. By the way, I was a real mascot when I was a child. My sisters were cheerleaders. And so I'm 6 and 8 or 7 and 9, depending on the time of year, years younger than my sisters. So when I was 10 years old, they dressed me up in a Vestal Golden Bear costume, which was the mascot of our high school team. And I was the high school. Yes, I do. I actually have a newspaper clipping. And I was the high school mascot for about 2 years when I was a little girl. So I was truly the mascot of the family. But comedians or mascots or family pets learn to get attention and survive in their family by being funny or cute. And actually, again, I think that just like all other energies on this planet, there's a double-edged sword with all of this, because some of the things I'm describing to you that may have been negative in my life have also been positive in my life, because without that energy, I couldn't talk in front of a group full of people. I couldn't do what I do. Without being a codependent, I couldn't be as good of a caring counselor, as compassionate as I am. Probably the codependency, the family dynamics, the issues of my childhood created the ability and the inspiration to tap into that level of my brain that allows for me to hear in a different frequency of energy, so I connect into the other side. I found as a child my religion was great solace, so it moved me in a way in which I'm still connected, and through my higher power I'm able to achieve that energy to talk to the other side, do the medium work that I do. Because I've used humor in an abusive way, I can also use humor in a productive way, and so I'm able to say and do things quickly and off the cuff. So any of these things that we learn that are negative also have a positive. There's two sides of the coin on the energy of this planet. So our goal in it is to take what's negative and just use what's positive out of it. So definitely being the comedian or the mascot in my family helped me. Grandiose ones. Men may be macho, women may have over-exaggerated femininity or be fragile or frail. I think Amadeus was talking a little bit about men being macho and grandiose in their energy, overconfident, and that may be a guise to inflate the ego because of some deep-seated insecurity, and that's an unhealthy characteristic of codependence, is being that insecure, where we have to inflate our ego through grandiose energy. Anybody that ever brags to you, a bragger, is definitely the most insecure people on the planet, which I think we're about to be led in this country by one of those. So we have to look at what that energy means to us and understand that for what it is, because people who are insecure are people who do a lot of bragging. They want people to see them differently than what they feel about themselves, so they inflate through their ego, and it's really an unhealthy characteristic. Humility, having some kind of humble energy, is a healthy characteristic, and is probably a characteristic that's not real when used by a codependent, but real when the codependent understands what it is and has it within. So let me explain what I mean by that. If you look really great in a dress and you know it, and you come walking along in that dress and you get compliments on the dress, unhealthy humble energy or humility is saying, oh no, and denying the compliment, and that's just a manipulative form of getting more attention. So that's unhealthy. Real humility is when somebody has the ability to stop and give compassion, caring, love, direction, connection, without the feeling of doing it in deliberate intent to get noticed or to get heard in some form or fashion. That's real humility. You got a question for me on that? I pop another one of these things in my mouth. I'm sorry, everybody, that I've had scratchy throat.
Yeah, I do have a question. You'd mentioned earlier a little bit about starting to work on a book, and after reviewing this material, pardon me, I am a bit biased, but I think this is an absolutely brilliant presentation. Will any of this be in a future?
Well, that's because I stole this material. It can't be in our book.
Just your interpretation, understanding, and being able to lay it out.
I'm just teasing. See, there's that humor again, you guys.
I'm over here laying on the floor.
I think it's important to explain psychology and energy in partnership. And I do take this material from different sources, by the way, and I put it into a workshop form so that I can share it. But I take it at its logical base and try to turn it around so that you can understand it from an energy perspective. Because, again, the truth is, unless we understand things from an energetic perspective on this planet, we're only dealing with our intellect. And when you're dealing with your intellect, you're not getting to the core of who you are. Because what's up here in your brain is very nice, but it's what's right here in your heart, the brain of your heart, and what's right here in your solar plexus, what your soul is trying to achieve and strive for, that makes the difference. So when you're looking at this stuff and you're attaching what the energy is around it, and I try to explain it by giving you little things that have happened in my life or with a client or whatever, so that it's really clear. I do think that makes for a good lesson for people. And if we can write that into understanding the karmic profile, we certainly will do that. I think we have a couple things coming out book-wise. One is on the karmic profile, because I do think that's people don't understand things at an energy level, and it's important to do that. The last one here that I think I didn't get to was the selfish, narcissistic ones. So, having underlying low self-esteem, narcissists try to fill themselves with an over-attention on self to the detriment of others. This is a form of codependency too, because remember, codependency is a disease of not knowing oneself. When you're narcissistic, you really don't know yourself at all. You only know what you think yourself should be. You're covering up for deep-seated insecurity when you're a narcissist. And narcissists often can mistreat others. So I knew a narcissist once who was a fairly wealthy man. He judged himself by how much money he had 2 children, loved his children until his children got to be teenagers, and they were no longer like accessories. You know, narcissists often use their children like accessories, meaning as long as they're cute and adorable and you can parade them around in front of other people and they perform like a monkey, performing monkey, that's fine. But when the children start to develop and have their own personalities, issues, problems, or whatever, the narcissist draws back from that because it's not a good reflection on the narcissist. So this particular person's young daughter got involved in drugs, heroin, which runs rampant in today's world. I was in a position of intervening and wanting to get this child into rehab. And the first thing that the father said was he didn't want to spend the money on the rehab. It was a hefty amount. I think it was $40,000. That's a lot of money to a lot of people. But to this person, it would be like $40 to somebody else. Because he was such a codependent narcissist, it really wasn't about the money. It was about the reflection on him. People knowing that he had to send his child to rehab. So that self-esteem was so low and so involved in his idealized version of who he was, and he didn't really know himself, that he couldn't even present in a way in which he was a caring, loving father, even though he cared and loved for his daughter. So that's a form of a narcissistic codependent. Got a question on that?
Boy, to love oneself that way, then push everybody and everything else out of the way.
Well, it's interesting because a narcissist is loving oneself in an inappropriate way, and true spirituality is loving yourself in an appropriate way.
That's a difficult thing to feel for some people.
I think it's a difficult thing for most people because, again, we have ego certainly involved in our lives. So I think we'll move on from echo and what?
4 minutes.
We have 4 minutes? You mean you guys have listened to me talk on and on and on? You haven't called? Is anybody listening? Okay. In 4 minutes, I think I want to talk about well, there's 2 things I want to do. Okay. I'm going to do it quick. Okay. Here's how a codependent moves through life. They have wounded and inadequate parents, an unsupportive environment. So they feel an invalidation and repression of their inner life and its internal cues. And so they can't get a validation of their own observations, feelings, and reactions because their parents are inadequate to the degree where a child feels like they have to be what their parent needs in order to survive. So then the child is neglecting their own needs. And they begin to stifle their true self or their child within. And oftentimes this happens when a child is more of a grown-up than a child. Or if parents triangulate a child where the father and the mother are having difficulty and the mother talks about the father to the child in a negative way and the father talks about the mother to the child in a negative way. So it begins to stifle the inner child, and so it stifles the true self. So then the child begins to construct a codependent false belief of self, that of a helper, a hero, a victim, a rescuer, whatever. And they deny that the family has toxicity in it. I didn't understand that my family was a dysfunctional family until I went through my second divorce and wanted to figure out what the hell was going on. Went through therapy. Codependents increase their tolerance and numbness to emotional pain. So a codependent will stand there and take it 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 and take it. I remember saying to myself one day that I was staying in a relationship because I was learning what true love was, and then God shouted at me real loud, "And you think that's true love?" So, sometimes spirit has to rock you out of your codependency. There are distortions in personal boundaries for a codependent. We talked about humor. We talked about over caring for somebody. We talked about coming in and doing things that we shouldn't do. We talked about enabling instead of empowering. A continued high tolerance for inappropriate behavior, an inability to grieve a loss to completion. So codependent is a monkey person. And what I mean by that is they go from one relationship to another with no space in between to get to know themselves. And so then they don't complete their losses. They block their own emotional, spiritual, and mental growth. They have compulsive behaviors to lessen that pain. That's through eating or drinking or whatever, or to lessen their ability to glimpse at their true selves. They progressively have shame and a loss of self-esteem. If they make a mistake, they hardly have the ability to tolerate it. If they're feeling out of control, they get really whacked out. They're delusional and they project their pain out to other people. They have stress-related illnesses. Fibromyalgia would be one that comes to mind. Their compulsions worsen, and then they can go into extreme mood swings, difficulty with intimate relationships, chronic unhappiness, interference with recovery from whatever chemical dependency or whatever issue they're using to resolve their pain. Okay, so very quickly, the stages of recovery are to reach out for help. We talked about that. Get therapy, go to a group, talk, read, look deep, journal, pray, meditate, recognize and get your needs met, set boundaries. Don't allow yourself to be suffering all the time. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Okay? Right, so, and then, is that it, Amadeus? Can I do one more?
Yes.
Okay, wait a minute. I lost it now. I wanted to. It's right after this one. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, what are characteristics of healthy and unhealthy narcissism or unhealthy people? Okay. So, somebody who is healthy, their orientation is about their true self. An unhealthy person has negative ego. A healthy person has humility and is present to themselves. An unhealthy person is absent and their ego is constantly inflated. A healthy person is assertive and self-assertive and admits their mistakes and takes personal responsibility. An unhealthy person is aggressive. A healthy person has healthy boundaries. An unhealthy person invades other people's boundaries and is selfish. Healthy people are self-indulgent as appropriate. Eating one piece of chocolate is self-indulgent as appropriate. Eating a pound of chocolate is a characteristic of codependency. Unhealthy people are selfishly self-indulgent. Healthy people see themselves as separate individuals with their own needs and feelings. Unhealthy people look at others and how they can use them or how they can inflate their ego. Healthy people have personal responsibility. Unhealthy people blame others. A healthy person owns their character defects. You've heard me do that a couple times tonight. An unhealthy person will project their character defects onto others. You make me feel. A healthy person is balanced rather than controlling, and they are not dominating. Unhealthy people try to control and dominate people, places, and things. Healthy people have self-awareness. Unhealthy people are numb or hypersensitive. Healthy people are sensitive to perceived criticism or rejection in a way in which they can make it a positive thing or understand if they're with a toxic person so they can set boundaries around that. Unhealthy people are overly sensitive to criticism and think even when they're not being criticized that they are. Healthy people express anger appropriately. Unhealthy people are the tantrum people. Healthy people are honest. Unhealthy people lie a lot. Healthy people have the ability to have empathy, and unhealthy don't. Healthy people are realistic and have flexibility. Unhealthy people are perfectionistic. The values of a healthy person is intimacy, love, productivity, and creativity. Unhealthy people just value power, money, beauty, and attention. Being around healthy people feels enlightening and enlivening. Being around unhealthy people feels toxic and draining. So I hope you all were listening tonight. You didn't call in, but that's okay. I hope you understand codependency a little bit more than you did. I may do a day seminar on codependency with a lunch involved here at the Empowered Living Center in the springtime. In the meantime, again, I want you to call in next week for your readings, and we'll look forward to talking to you then. So thanks for your help tonight, Amadeus.
And a lot out of it.
Giving the male perspective and the partner perspective and all that good kind of stuff that everybody thinks is silly. Okay, everybody, tune in next week. I think we're off. Are we done?
We are done.
Okay, good night. Now we get a call.
Melinda's Angels. Oh. Yes, actually, yes, there is. I just repositioned the microphone a little bit more between the two of us. Oh, well, I'm just such a soft spoken too, I guess.